Michael Tartakov, Ph.D., is a social historian trained in art history, in the history of art and culture of traditional India, with a focus on the monumental arts. He sees and uses comparisons between Indian and American cultures he has lived in as touchstones for understanding each culture. His essay, Why Compare Dalits and African Americans, in the edited volume, Against Stigma, sketches out the close similarities in the criminalization of these otherwise quite different communities and cultures. A forthcoming essay will add the situation of the Jews of Christian Europe as a third example of this pervasive social pattern. He understands visual images as instrumentalities in the social world. He would call his approach materialist, as it reads the outcomes of social practices as a basis better for understanding them and the theory of explanation based on expressions about them. I now happily move to Gary Mike.
Well, good morning. Good afternoon. You've been sitting in this room for a day and a half now. You've been sitting here. Oh, we've been sitting in this room since Thursday evening. And one of the first things I did when I came in here was start taking a look at the picture. How many of you have taken a look at the pictures on the walls? That's most of you. Have you read the labels? Do you know what they're about? Well, I ended up with fewer hands at that. It wasn't until late yesterday that I went back and read the labels and found out that these aren't portraits of women who graduated from Duke. These are women, a selection of women who are all living with HIV. This exhibit is here to communicate to all of us how important it is, how many of us are vulnerable to it, particularly to our younger people who are vulnerable maybe than us older ones. Think about HIV means, but certainly to realize it can happen to almost anyone. We're all vulnerable to it. That's what I do. I'm interested in how we read pictures, that we take the time to read them. They go by so fast. If we don't think about them carefully, we just assume the things that are obvious about them. And that old saw about a picture being worth 1,000 words, if you don't know what the picture's about already, you will not know what it's about from looking at it. You don't know the name of the person. You don't know even the gender sometimes of what you're looking at. You really take some time to look. And my book, Dalit Art and Visual Imagery, is about reading carefully. It's about the experience, the life experience of Dalits, how some of them have used imagery to define themselves, and other people have used imagery to help define them. But it's also about how do we understand pictures when we look at them. I began thinking about Dalits and visual imagery a little bit before Professor Korat took me over. Eleanor Zelliot showed one afternoon when we had Ashkar Ali Engineer in Madison talking about politics of contemporary India. Eleanor filled in time doing what she called Dalit art. And the picture I remember, the picture that captured me, was a black and white picture of 5 or 6 women carrying a bed sheet with black writing across it that said, so-and-so, the landlord has raped this woman and he should go to jail. And they were so good with that picture, they got it into the newspaper and they got him into court. Now, I don't know whether he actually went to jail. We know that the problem of the practice of the law isn't nearly as good as the laws we have there or here. But pictures are tools, they're immense tools. And a lot of the time when we talk about art, we talk about just those most wonderfully skillful, precious pieces that we can stay looking at again and again and again. But the fact of art that makes a difference, the fact of language that makes a difference, no matter how wonderful Shakespeare's language is, or any of your favorite line, it's the fact that you can say a sentence that makes a difference. You can tell somebody, I need a glass of water, or we need water for this field. That's what makes a difference. And pictures help us convey things, and they're extremely concrete, and they make things real. In any case, the year I went to start looking at art in India, with Zelliot's help, with Vasant Moon, who some of you know, who's taken a lot of us around to a lot of wonderful places. Vasant Moon is also the man responsible for republishing all of Ambedkar's words in that wonderful set of things that came out of Mumbai from the early 90s on. This is 1988. I'm walking on the street in Mumbai. Those of you who've been in Mumbai at all have been in the fort, because that's where we go for tourists. There's Flora Fountain. If you look between those two taxi cabs, on that electricity standard, there's a poster I ran into. And it's got interesting imagery. It's got this imagery of a Buddha. Right? It's a Thai bodhisattva, but it's Buddhism. The poster is reaching out to Buddhists. And it's got in the lower left-hand corner this little panther. And that's not any panther. That's Emory Douglas's panther for the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Emory Douglas designed these posters, designed that imagery. He probably laid out the Black Panther paper every month. He was one of those people with Huey Newton and Bobby Seale who created this event. Well, the Dalit Panthers, where our word Dalit became popularized from, they knew something about this, and they identified with those African Americans. And what I'm talking about today really is things we share back and forth between here and there, and how important some of those things are. Well, I thought, all right, so some of these guys here have been to D.C. or somewhere and have brought back the idea of the Panthers and their resistance. But Moon took me to a slum, which was largely a Dalit slum. I don't know the name of it, although my friends can help me if I need to find out. In it, there was a tiny little room that people shared things in, a little activity room, and in that there was a locked bookcase, and there was, I'd say about 7 feet of books. Come through, worked over, and about 3 feet of those books were on African Americans. As little as most Americans know about India, as few Americans have ever heard of Dr. Ambedkar, right? Dalits have been looking at us, partly because we produce all of this stuff, but partly because a lot of Dalits have looked at African Americans as a model for resistance, right? Because African Americans have stood up. Well, they've had no room to stand up, and they've been successful resisting. And the Dalit Panthers were about trying to stand up now and resist. And like the Black Panther Party for self-defense, you all remember that actual title. Black Panther Party, it was created to defend the black community from the police and the other institutions that came into it. And they were dangerous to it. Well, there's the third picture from the top of the poster. There's Dr. Ambedkar, who some of our students who've been looking at India have seen him and seen his picture and his name. He looks pretty gentle there. And he could be sweet. This gives a little more of the intensity. This is one of the most incredible people who've ever lived. I probably won't get as sentimental as some of my friends do, but this is Frederick Douglas and Dr. King wrapped up into one. This is Malcolm X, Dr. Du Bois, and Rosa Parks. He even led a Rosa Parks-like demonstration that got public facilities open to Dalits in India. The court case took 8 or 9 years. He was a lawyer. He could take that case through. This incredible man. And I'm showing him between an African-American woman who's gone to see about things and a Dalit who's head of the Ambedkar Bhavan in Delhi. And I'm really showing it because when I went to meet people at Ambedkar Bhavan and see things, I got closer to the picture and I saw where some students from Jawaharlal Nehru University had pasted this little marker up on the top, which doesn't mean a lot to you if you're not my age, if you didn't live through the 60s, but for those of us who did, that wasn't just a pretty slogan. That wasn't just buy more of this stuff, have longer eyelashes. Black is beautiful. Dalit is dignified. And you can't know how important that phrase is. Dalit is dignified, right? Unless you've seen what the level of humiliation people have had to live with and still have to live with. One of my most important teachers who took me through India as Indian art and taught me how to be the technical person I am. I remember her talking about James Baldwin, and what a wonderful writer he was. And of course, he's a heroic writer. But talking about James Baldwin, and then she stopped halfway through, and she says, but he's so ugly. Right? And you all know what that man looks like, right? We all have him in our mind with sweet eyes, right? That face. But that's what she saw. As she was 60 years old at the time, she'd been educated to what beauty was, this was, and she internalized that, and probably a lot of people more than her internalized imagery like that. Black is beautiful meant a great deal for a lot of people. And Dalit is dignified, and black is beautiful. They still know, right? We're still learning the meanings of those things. Oh, gotta figure out what button I'm using. I have a friend, Ernie Allen, who some people here may know. He teaches history at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. Ernie was in the Black Panther Party and doing labor organizing in Detroit. And when federal agents and police were actually shooting down Black Panther Party members in the streets, it wasn't a good situation in the middle 60s. Ernie took off and lived in Mexico for several years with a woman who he lived in the house of Elizabeth Catlett. Catlett was one of the artists of the Renaissance, the Harlem Renaissance, who found America so difficult as Baldwin, who moved off to Paris and lived in France half of the time, most of the time, for much of the last part of his life. Catlett lived in Mexico. She found it, she'd come visit, but she felt safer there. Well, this is her paean to not Ernie, but to the Black Party for Self-Defense, with Emory's panther, and each of those little buttons is a little button. We used to all wear political buttons, and black is beautiful. Black is beautiful. Even if you get it on its side, like she does one of these, it's still beautiful. When you look at that, you see that mixture of African mask that's put into it. Right? That's an artist, that's a fine artist, a gallery artist using her art to reach out toward social issues and show social life. This is Sojourner Truth. This is our Sojourner Truth in Florence, Massachusetts, which is about 3.5 miles north of the Northampton that we were just hearing about, where the last quilt was made. Sojourner Truth lived for about a decade in Florence in a utopian community. Sojourner Truth is one of our great feminists, one of our great African-American women, one of the people who made this country. And she lived, as I said, for about 10 years in Florence, Massachusetts. This statue was commissioned and built about 15 years ago, well, designed and cast about 15 years ago. And it's something which is held in pride by the people of Florence. They use it when they take everybody, I was going to say children, well, when they take people on a tour of the Underground Railroad sites. Some of the actual houses that were used to move the enslaved out of slavery on their way to Canada. Some of us are marked by this woman and this statue. So it's an important local way we talk about things. All over the world, and certainly in India, we use statues like this. There's John Bracey, one of our elders, head of African American Studies, again at the University of Massachusetts, which is one of the places African American Studies was invented and spread from. It's still one of the fine places to go to study it. Bracey, this is Memorial Day. Every year on Memorial Day, we give out fellowships to graduating high school seniors who have written the best essays on social justice. This is Mumbai. It's 1962. It's about 6 or 7 years after Dr. Ambedkar died. That's the statue of Dr. Ambedkar and the people who turned out to see him. Untouchable, it really meant that. It's a nice little phrase when we get it here. I mean, but it's just words. You are considered, you are still considered. Some of my friends don't say ex-untouchable. Some of my friends just say untouchables because in India, largely, people still are. Like, people are still black here. And things haven't all changed. Maybe not enough. Not just not enough, not much has changed. But a statue like this is something to gather around. Besides untouchable, going back in the Indian customary law books to Manu, back to Manu in the 3rd century, not just untouchable, you should remain unseeable. But you put this image of Ambedkar, the father of the Constitution, you put him up in bronze, 20 feet high in the middle of Mumbai, next to the Maidan, and a lot of people turned out to see him. Really important. That was in 1962. I started looking at these things around 88, and just at the right moment, when Ambedkar's centenary of birth came up, it was 92? Yeah. All over India, there were statues of Ambedkar. Dalits proudly saying, this is us, we belong, we're part of the situation. There he is, that's the standard pose. He's almost always shown This Dalit, who was, as Rod mentioned the other day, the second or third person, we don't know, maybe the fourth, to get a high school education in India of Dalits. First allowed to get an education. But he ended up being the man who essentially wrote the first draft of the Indian Constitution. Now, the Constitutional Assembly rewrote it in details, but this is the father of the Constitution, as everyone in India would tell you. And in this case, it's the image put in front of the Lok Sabha, their Congress, their legislature, pointing at it. The Congress Party used the statue as a kind of bribe to get the Republican Party to vote with them. Like most bribes, it didn't really work very much. We're losing the Congress Party again. In any case, those images, though, give us something to gather around, give us something to see. And as I said, if you're not supposed to be seen at all, to put you in public, to put you next to the Lok Sabha, it's an important event. We all heard about this one last month, right? This is James Meredith at Ole Miss. This is the statue that some fraternity boys, we don't have to define the words in that, you know, made fun of, wrote graffiti on, hung something on. Well, that happens in India too, right? It's a way to get at things. I got this picture off the internet. It's probably a picture she put on somewhere out of a book. But this is what happens with our Sojourner Truth too, right? If you look at her carefully, she's holding his hand, right? Sojourner Truth stands with her hands out, and you cannot stop walking up and wanting to grab onto that hand, you know, and be part of it. These people represent us. They stand for us. We've had to look at people all our lives that we're not quite sure of what they mean, or we've decided it's a shame they're up there. But we have some of our people too, and it's extremely important. Dr. Ambedkar died in 54. 56. I was close. I'm an historian. I'm not good at numbers like you economists. Died in 56. The first statues of him, and I've worked on this a lot, were done in 62. 2 or 3 of them in the area, one in Mumbai, one in Pune, and this one just outside of Aurangabad on the road, a major road between Aurangabad and Ajanta. It was done in 62. This picture I took of it in 1971. And here it is in 1996. Same image on the same platform, maybe the paint's been renewed, but you can see the grading that's been built around it to defend it. Because in the same way that Meredith's statue is a provocation to those who don't want it, who still don't want it, who still hate the fact that he got into all this, right? There are people who are angry at what Ambedkar did. So the struggle is still going on, and it's still a very live struggle. And all over India, I have pictures of this Ambedkar in cages to protect it. Now, this picture was here for your students of Indology, and I don't think I have any students of Indology here. But this is Manu. This is Manu the lawgiver. And if you look him up on Google, you will get a much more traditional, reverential sort of portrait of a wise old man. But this is Manu as women today see him. Manu, whose laws punish women almost as badly as Dalits, like most of our whole laws did, right? This is Manu by Savi Savarkar. Savi is a major gallery artist. He's known all over India. He's known internationally. And he really is one of those super fine artists whose very marks are read by people. And this is the Dalits' view of Manu. In fact, you know it yourself. You look at the building, and you know whether you belong in there or you don't. You look at a picture of somebody from a particular community or a certain kind of judge in a courtroom, you know whether you belong with them. Solidarity is there, or it's not. In any case, this is Savi's Manu. This is one of Savi's masterpieces, and it is a masterpiece. It's a print. It's an etching about 3 feet wide. Most etchings are about 6 inches square. Some of them up to a foot. But Savi works big. Okay, it's called Peshwa. The last time I showed it to somebody in Los Angeles, I've got this and about 12 other pieces which are in frames like this that I've used in exhibitions at a number of universities, at Iowa and in Madison, Wisconsin, and at the University of Massachusetts. First time I showed this one in Los Angeles, she said, oh, what a Picasso-esque line. That's what comes to the art historian's mind. And if you get up close to it, that becomes pretty apparent. It's a complex image, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but it gives you those things that fine arts do, and that modernist art does. It doesn't give you, modernist art, it's modern if it looks a little weird, right? If it's not just a simple picture of somebody, if there's something strange about it, that's the whole point. But strangeness is a kind of distancing effect. It's not just, most modern art, let be clear, modern art is interior decoration. The galleries are all in the same neighborhoods as defining expensive furniture. I mean, it is interior decoration, but some of it tells a real, powerful, meaningful story. And being a Dalit, Savi never expected to sell to the rich people, so he's been able to tell his story very thoroughly, but he's used the modernist surrealist technique. He just lets stuff fall out of his head. And so you don't always know what it means. And sometimes you ask him and he says, well, I think I was, or he just lets it come out as the surrealists try to let your unconscious come out. So on one end, there's the scarecrow head, like you get in a grain stack in the countryside, or somebody builds a new house to warn away the evil eye with this scarecrow head. It's a pot, it's an inverted pot. And there's the Brahman's Namam, symbol of the Vaishnavite on top, and there's the South Indian Brahman's sort of hairlock on top. So the right image is of the Brahman, and that's one of Savi's Dalits next to it, sitting on the ground looking a little dazed, surrounded by so many heads. They're all watching him. What's he going to do? On the other side of the picture, there's another one of these scarecrow heads, a pot inverted. The two symbols there sort of working as the eyes of those horrifying teeth. There's the Aum, the Devanagari for the syllable Aum. In the beginning was the word. Well, in Hinduism, in the beginning was the syllable, the mantra Aum. And so it's his symbol for Brahmins. That looks like a 3 and a little hook behind him, a dot. That's the Aum. And then the other eye is a swastika. You didn't know it, but all of you know a word of Sanskrit. Swastika, making of good luck, makes good luck. We also know that swastika, they got in, the Jains and Hindus have been using this since before Christ. They've been using this as a good luck symbol. And it still means that in India in general. But any internationally educated, any educated Indian, anybody, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, who know about the world around them, they've heard of fascism, they heard of the Nazis in World War II. And you notice Savi's swastika is tilted a little bit toward the diagonal. The Minister for Education in the Nazi government was actually a student of Jainism, and so he brought them this Aryan symbol from India. And Savi's calling the Brahmins, he's calling them fascists. And they know that's what he's doing. He's playing with them. The image is there. But part of what you can learn from what I just said was pictures don't have a meaning by themselves. You bring the meaning to it with what you know in your context. And so there's that pot. And then in the middle, there's this guy who's really wonderfully ambiguous. And I've played with Savi and not gotten a good answer back from this. Is that Brahman looking at us from behind another kind of monster mask? Is that a Dalit hiding? Is that Savi? Is that the artist? Or is that us? Right? Trying to look at the world, having these different identities. We all have that two-ness that Dr. Du Bois talked about. We all are living in two different places, two different lives, or many lives, many lives. Well, the point of the picture, the fine art picture on the wall here, those wonderful, I'm going to call them collages, those quilts we just saw. They allow us to see images of the world we come from, find our identity in them, find other identities, know where we stand, and they bring us viscerally into it. We have an ability to transfer. So when we put up this show, we put it up with lots of labels to explain what it is, not just, wow, what a weird picture, but bring some of those meanings. There's a lot more meaning in that one than I had time to talk to you about. This is, I'm sorry. This is Banta Singh. Banta Singh, we all heard a year and a half ago, December 2 years back, that terrible rape of the Indian woman on the bus, the college student. It came everywhere. And well, it was as terrible as everything we heard about it. There's no doubt about that. But any of us who worked in India with caste, who know anything about Dalits, the point is not that was a terrible thing. The point is rape in India happens relatively seldom to college students in Delhi buses. It happens continually in the villages to Dalits and other lower caste women. Continually, they're subject to the power of landlords, and not just as even a pseudo-sexual crime, as a means of humiliating the family, as a means, it is violent and brutal as anything in slavery, is what it means. Banta Singh's daughter was raped. Banta Singh was a singer, a political activist. He started making noise about it. They got the family arrested. They got the family prosecuted, and they got the men who did it put into jail. So he was strong enough. It's hard to do that. Somebody asked yesterday, Vimal was talking, we have so few people to go with Ambedkar on those posters. And we have more people than Ambedkar. He seems to be the one who stands out. We don't have nearly as many leaders there as we can think of, and maybe in some other places. Now, partly that's me. I'm from another country, and I'm not living as deeply in Indian culture. But in fact, to stand up in the village and say anything, right? We didn't have Dalit literature until after World War II or so, because Dalits weren't allowed to get education. They weren't allowed. Once they got education, they started writing, some of them. Well, standing up in the village, Banta Singh stood up. He was beaten so badly that he lost both his arms and his legs. The picture's by Kranti, who's a photographer, and the reason that picture up there is because photography is probably the most important art we have right now. It can report right away. You all have telephones, where if something happens in front of you that's rotten, that's wrong. Even if it's just somebody following your sister around the grocery store, worried that she's going to steal something. There's a moment to take a photograph of something like that and share it. And things in the villages that happen are now getting recorded. Some atrocities. Among Americans here, do you know what the atrocity is in India? It's the government term for lynching. It's the government term for lynching, and it goes on every day, except not only one man here, one woman there. It's 12 people burned to death in a house. It's hundreds and hundreds continually. It's a woman who's been elected head of a panchayat, just pulled off a bus and beheaded because the elders in the village didn't want to put up with this affront to them. It's really a much more dangerous situation there. And it costs a lot more to many people, not to everyone in every place, but in much of the world there, it's more dangerous. Well, anyway, he lost those parts. Kranti, who took the picture, is a Dalit, who goes to the site of every atrocity he knows of, records it, and he's a journalist, he gets it into the papers. This is Banta Singh a year and a half later. He's a singer. This was titled, "They Can't Kill My Voice." And it appeared on the front of a major magazine and got a lot of play. And other people did pictures of Banta Singh in the hospital and Banta Singh even singing. But the point is, Adult recording these things is a little different. It gave him a little different response, a little more maybe safety in the fact that he'll be portrayed in a dignified manner despite what he's gone through. It takes an extremely heroic man to stand up under those conditions, and that's what he's done. And it's taken someone like Kranti, who could be taking pictures of sports events and making a little bit of money doing cricket and house raisings and the new president of the bank. But Kranti is giving his time very much, maybe not all, but he doesn't let an important event, political event, go by. That's Dalits. That's Kranti, showing somebody some of his work. So you can see an artist too. That's fairly unusual. There are very few artists who actually deal with the political world. One thing that has happened in the United States, one thing African American artists have done that don't have in India yet, is pictures that show how dignified, how beautiful, show our heroes. Ambedkar is up there, and Savitri Bai Phule, and a couple of others. But the fact is, we need pictures of Dalits that show them just doing everyday things, show them as regular people, as handsome people, and so on. This is Richard Yard. He's a major African-American artist, with his portrait of Jack Johnson. All right, Jack Johnson, the fighter, who was even taller than Richard. Richard, his entire oeuvre was African-Americans from about 1940 up to his own time. His parents' generation and his Avalon Ballroom, Jitterbug, artists. I've got Bessie Smith on my one. Okay, and I'm going to finish with this picture. This is, again, by Elizabeth Catlett. It's a wood block print. You can see the gouges that went into the wood to make each one of those lines. 2 gouges per line. But then you can see also the beauty in the face, that strong African-American woman, sharecropper. That's as close as you can get to a slave, right? That's the serf of medieval Europe, sharecropper. But giving her coat is held together by a safety pin. But again, you get her as someone we can look up to. And after choosing that picture, I ran into this one, who's the woman who got me into this mess. Her name is Fannie Lou Hamer. She too was a sharecropper, one who got politicized, and she's the one who drove the Dixiecrats out of the Democratic Party. And I'm sorry that Major isn't here, so I can explain that all those people voting for Obama weren't just black people who voted for the black guy. In fact, I hope you know, statistics show that black people vote less on the basis of race than white people. Right? They vote for what benefits them. They know who you stand for, what you're going to do to them, whether or not, if you're talking about health care or not having health care, and so on. People didn't vote for Barack Obama just because he was black, although that didn't hurt him with some people, it hurt him with other people. The fact is, Sarah Palin, remember Sarah Palin? It isn't how good the Democrat is that makes you vote for him, it's that you've got these Republicans over there, and they've got that party where all of the Dixiecrats went to the Democratic Party, and what that means. So I'm going to stop there. But that's what pictures are good. Pictures are levers. They're tools. They're machines. We all need to use them. That's exactly what I was referring to, that kind of thing. They knew who they were referring to. Nazis meant nothing to them. They had this traditional vision, they understood it. My friend David, who runs 4 different Baptist choirs, uses the elm on his business card because it's a holy syllable, even though he's a good Baptist. No, the pictures mean, it's not just you can make up anything. I mean, today, if you use the Confederate battle flag, you may think you're talking about liberty, but you're really talking about liberty in the South, and there's the only thing this Confederate battle flag stands for. But most things are transferable. And some of those children are used to thinking they're talking about, oh, being free and a rebel. They just need to hear what it actually stands for most other people. But we bring the meaning to things. Things don't have meaning. Meaning is in us. Thank you.
In addition to that, in addition to it being a Sanskrit symbol, it's also a symbol in China called Wa, and the symbol means absolute immortality. Hitler was very short-sighted.
To say the least.
Thank you very. You really take us into all of us in back in the history, the Dalit Panthers history, Black Panthers history, and Dr. Ambedkar's struggle, the socio-cultural struggle, and then how how the consciousness emerges from the slave-like people, and very well described the picture which is written, black is beautiful and Dalit is dignified. And I remember this slogan was given in Durban by the Dalit movement people when we went to raise the caste issue. Caste should be included in the UN yeah. And we raised this slogan with 50,000 people, 50,000 activists from all over the world, and they really supported us, and they also shouted the slogan, caste, down caste system, down caste system. And we our friends in South Africa, we give this slogan, we raise this slogan, black is beautiful and Dalit is dignified. So thank you, Gary, you really take me in past history. And it's a marvelous presentation.
Thank you. The handout we handed out, let me call on in just a sec. The handout I handed out has reference to a couple of books, the Dalit art and image, but also Against Stigma, which is from a conference a long time ago. But there's a paper in there by Dr. Torat, and there's a paper in there by Dr. our hero here. So it's the hell of being 72 years old. You start losing nouns. You know, as an art historian, I hope I can just hold on to my adjectives. Very much important to us. In any case, the other thing on there is a website where you can get a feed daily from the biggest Indian newspapers, daily events occurring to Dalits. It gives you a chance to tune in and hear some of these things which you can learn about directly from events.
Thank you for a very powerful presentation. Now, talking about that culture, that is, of course, it's both comparing that experience, past experience, and reflect. It is both of oppression and also resilience. The very fact that they are survived for centuries with oppression is something marvelous. But talking about, though in India, for instance, Dalits are being of late, talked about as descendants of the original inhabitants of the country, in Adivasis, original people, indigenous people. I don't think there is so much in terms of the culture or the history is being documented. It's all being destroyed. What we know of today just now is just a history of humiliation and oppression. And therefore, I don't know how many of them want to sort of relate themselves to their past. It only stops at the history of humiliation, and only of late now, because of the Dalit literature, there is an attempt to reconstruct their history. Because many of the positive aspects of their culture were already being altered by the. Therefore, I don't know, when you talk about African culture, they can go back, black Americans can go back to Africa, South Africa, and they can relate themselves. I know that there are two schools of thought. There are people who might want to say, come on, let us go back to our memories of struggle and humiliation, and then. But there are people who just want to forget about their past. Just don't talk about. Okay. Even I know, for instance, people, they don't want, some of them don't want to even say that I am Dalit. And for instance, the present generation of young people, they do not want to, they want to maintain anonymity. For instance, those students who come to law
conundrum, though. It is the conundrum. It's the conundrum of passing to some extent, right? Some of the people we think of as white people here are not so white, right? You became white in states like Louisiana because it was on your birth certificate. Because when they were filling out your birth certificate, someone stood there saying, "You write this." Same way you become a gentleman by becoming an officer in the Navy. The point is, white or not is a question. And of course, we do so much color of face, people will make their estimate anyway. People can't pass as easily here. Well, it can't pass easily in India either. You could lie on the application to the job, but people are going to watch you and you don't go very far. And who's your family? You know, where do you come from? If your name isn't, they just say, "What is your caste?" And if they find out later, you'll suffer the consequences, clearly. Savi is one of the few artists in India who, he is a political man. He is a politician of immense power. There are Dalits who do very fine art who are in the galleries, and they certainly don't say who they are. I don't know who's to say who it is. And I don't know who to say, you have to stand up and be political. Because for all of us, most of us, it's more convenient not to be too political, just to bury your vote. But those who are able to stand up, they take danger, but in fact, they're the ones who are going to change it, because it's not going to change. It's not going to go away. It won't take a generation. It won't take 100 years. We're talking about something, I mean, Sandy Darity talked about it, right? It's going to take a long time, or some really powerful push. We had an immense wave of civil rights in the 50s and 60s. That wave has passed over us. We need more waves. We have to find a way to make them. And so you can tell somebody else you have to come out and be political, this and that, and get fired from your job. No. But we all have to find ways and support those people who can stand up. And when we can stand up, do stand up for each other. Not like that university president we heard about earlier, Margaret Walker's president, I forgot his name. But the fact that the man who was himself a strong figure, but in order to make this work, kept having to compromise so much. I'm not at all. Very few of us in a position to say that he compromised too much or a little. We're all balancing. But that balancing is the way we're going to move it forward.
All right. Does anyone else have a remaining question? Yes, just a moment.
Good day. In your presentation, you obviously gave a lot of comparisons between the African Americans and the Dalit culture. And even the point that you brought up about the Dalit culture going backward so far, and that there was actually a more glorious past that might be ignored, same thing that applied with African Americans. But so I guess the question that I have is, there seems to be one difference that I would like to ask you, could you gauge the effects? And that's the cultural piece, where, you know, we can't necessarily say, we'll go back to Africa. Okay, well, what language I'm going to speak? And I don't know necessarily what country I'm going to come from. So the Dalit, he's already in his country. He might already speak his own language. There is an attachment to the country that he's in. Whereas with the African American, you might find that in certain places, he might not even feel he belongs here. He or she might not feel he belongs here. So with that being said, how could you, in your experience, gauge what impact that might have had with the Dalits in comparison to the African Americans, that association with?
Thank you. So this is my nephew, so he's been asking me questions like this for a long time. He's full of good questions. But it is a point maybe that we're all dealing with too. I mean, we have this parallel of the social situation that African Americans and Dalits are in that have so much alike, and that's what we've been discussing. India and the U.S. are quite different cultures, right? We have really different traditions in both places. A lot of things we share, and they're worth absolutely. I think we're learning from each other in really useful ways, but really different people and really different cultures. He just indicated one of them. African Americans develop their own culture with a little bit of space. You know, we've had more space here. It's a richer place, and that's partly where there's more space. But there's space opening up now. And there's culture. There's culture in drama. There are songs. People are starting to pull these things out. There's a culture of humiliation. Most people want to forget those things. White people certainly do. Do you know we were almost all slaves? In the Roman Empire, that was slaves. Greece and so-called democracy, that was slaves. The slaves were even lower than the women, and the women were held down deeply low. Slavery never left Europe. It never left Europe. It didn't get invented. It was just Africans became a special part of it, and more recently got treated worse than some. But the fact is, we all come from that kind of background. We weren't all kings and queens, although kings had a lot to do with all of this because they simply took advantage of everybody around. There are differences. We have to learn both of what was like and what was different.
I think we have time for one more question.
Well, I don't have pictures to get there. I travel with him for 1,000 miles and help him to get photograph inside the house and outside the house. This picture is from my village. My uncle, my all relatives on this. I just want to respond to you. You are right that you do not know which country you belong. And that's very important thing. The point is, it's not a matter of geography. In India or USA, it's a matter whether you are right, which are the right. And if you don't have anything, not only that you don't have right, but you are also exploited, then you don't belong to that place. You get a feeling of alienation. When Ambedkar and Gandhi met in 1950, what Ambedkar told Gandhi, Gandhi asked him, why are you against me? I am doing so much for the untouchable. Ambedkar said, Gandhiji, I don't have a homeland. That's how you feel alienated. And I will give you one classical example, that the Dalits, when they were in the military, they fought the Britishers against the Hindu king, because that Hindu kingdom has enslaved Dalits. There are certain painting of Savi, which really has not shown, where they were required to hang caught around their neck, hand on, and then the group behind when they walk on the road. So you don't belong, you don't have rights. So I think it's not a matter of geography. It's a matter whether you get your dignity, whether you get your rights. And if you don't, then you don't belong. And that's what really nation is.
I want to kind of say something piggyback on what you said to challenge your point a bit. You mentioned how
Come get the microphone.
Yes.
in India, or the Indian culture, even for the Dalits, even if they fight with the British against the Hindus, which are also Indians, they still call themselves Indian. They're still Indian. For the black African American, what do we call ourselves?
Well, I don't know.
Exactly.
But I said,
That's the whole point.
but if you do not know where you come from at all, there is no belonging. The belonging is only with respect to rights. I must be treated and be given
But
such
you
rights.
can still say, man, I feel proud of my Indian culture, of my Indian heritage. For younger,
I don't know. Okay.
All right.
Hold on. To an extent, and everybody has a position, and everybody has a category. Here we are. For the African American experience, for the young African American in America, who do we associate ourselves with? We don't associate ourselves so much with Americans, and this is from my position, we don't associate ourselves so much with Americans because we don't identify with it all of us. At least from my position and from my cohorts and from my compadres, people who I've been around, we don't associate.
This is our chance to learn from each other, and it's a useful way. The word Indian, by the way, is a British word. It wasn't invented there. It's the word the British put on them. There was no Indian until the British invented it. So we're all working on that identity. And let me bring up one thing that Gyan Pandey, I'll be real quick. What Gyan Pandey is sort of the center. What he does is about democracy, how we find ourselves in a democracy. And in the end, we don't have one yet, right? We're working on a very imperfect one, both in India and here, trying to find a way towards it. And our identities at that point.
What's up now? Brother, what's up? This is a groovy party, man. I can dig it.